Welcome back. We're here for our fourth voting session. And by the way, starting next week and whenever possible, just be prepared. We may vote not just on Thursdays when we're able to, so that we can move things if they become ready midweek. We'll keep you posted. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bills on the voting list today. We're going to start with Nathan, Senate Bill 188.
Senate Bill 188, a reprint of which is on your desk, establishes a rare disease advisory council to enhance research and provide policy recommendations on matters related to individuals living with rare diseases in the state. The council's general duties include performing a survey, developing policy recommendations, creating a publicly accessible web page, providing an annual report, and providing recommendations to address the needs of individuals with rare diseases in the state. The Department of Health must staff the council. The amendment offered by Senator Lamb, beginning on page 2 of the reprint, alters the appointment of certain ex officio members, adds the chair of the State Advisory Council on Hereditary and Congenital Disorders to the council. On page 3, the amendment adds a representative of an organization that provides specified case management services. And on page 5, strikes a provision related to evaluating state newborn screening programs. That was the topic of some favorable with amendment testimony. And the amendment also adds patients with private health insurance to those whose prescription coverage must be evaluated. The chair is also offering an additional amendment specifying that the council maintain a web page rather than a website, to clarify that the council does not need to stand up a full site outside of the current MDH web presence.
Senator Hayes.
Move the bill favorable as amended.
Have a motion and a second on the favorable. Any questions on the bill as amended? All those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. 188 receives favorable with amendments. Next bill, Nathan's, is Senate Bill 349.
Senate Bill 349, for which you also have a reprint, requires the State Board of Examiners of Psychologists to issue electronic as opposed to paper licenses or registrations to any applicant who meets the existing statutory requirements. The bill also specifies that a renewal notice will be sent only by electronic means rather than mail, unless a renewal notice is sent by electronic means, is returned as undeliverable, or a licensee or registrant specifically requests that a renewal notice be sent by mail. The bill also repeals the requirement that the board include specific information on each license and registration issued. There's an amendment offered by the chair that specifies that on the specific request of an applicant, the board must print a paper copy of the verification of the license or registration from its website and mail it to the applicant. The amendment has been discussed with the board and there's no objection. Otherwise, there's no fiscal impact and no opposition.
Have a motion and a second on the favorable with amendments. Any questions? All those in favor, raise your hand. That bill receives a unanimous favorable with amendments report. Next bill, Senate Bill 283.
Senate Bill 283 is a bill that is assigned to the Budget and Tax Committee. The Finance Committee is second. There's a reprint on your desk, and the bill establishes a behavioral health workforce investment fund to provide reimbursement for costs associated with educating, training, certifying, recruiting, placing, and retaining behavioral health professionals and paraprofessionals. MHCC must conduct a comprehensive behavioral health workforce needs assessment, and the assessment must be submitted by December of this year and must recommend an initial allocation to the fund and identify which programs the allocation will support. So the bill does not include a mandated funding amount. The amount shown in the fiscal note is intended to illustrate the level of funding that DLS believes is necessary to carry out the purposes of the fund. The amendment adds the Department of Labor and the Career and Technical Education Committee to the list of entities MHCC must coordinate with when conducting the required needs assessment. Both the bill and the amendment passed budget and tax unanimously.
Move favorable. Have a motion and a second for a favorable. That has amendments
As amended.
as amended. Motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Yeah, raise your hand. That better. No opposition. That receives a unanimous report favorable with amendments. We'll move to Senate Bill 48. David?
Senate Bill 48 was on the voting list last week, and there was some alterations to the amendments offered by the sponsor. You have a reprint in front of you. And essentially, the definition of emergency manager is moved from one part of the code to the part of the code in that in Title 14 of the public safety article, which would apply to the entire title. So if you go to page 3, you'll see that emergency manager is added to the general definitions for that title. That's the only really change from what you saw last week. If you recall, the bill adds additional organizations that state employees can be members of and qualify for paid disaster leave. The bill also requires that this leave may be extended for 15 days with the approval of an appointing authority if the disaster continues. The sponsor added amendments adding additional groups or specifying the names of some of the groups that these employees could be members of. Also, if you go further into the reprint, you'll see that instead of just, there's two other types of leave here. There's leave for training, which would apply to folks in the military. This would add the uniform services, which is the guards and public health service and folks like that, who can also avail themselves of this paid leave for training purposes if they have to leave work for training. And then finally, there's a leave that was established as a result of the second Gulf War, that if you were deployed, you would get the pay difference between what you get paid in the military versus your state paycheck. It would also add these folks from the uniform services. So it wouldn't just be folks who are in the Army, Navy, Marines, or Coast Guard.
Senator Mounts?
This isn't really a particular question about the bill. It's more just a general question, but aren't these all authorities or powers that are controlled by the executive? Can't the governor grant this leave? Isn't that how the leave is currently granted?
These are existing leaves already. I mean, these leaves exist in the code. You're adding groups who can access this leave. So these leaves are already there. The governor has the ability to establish some leaves through regulation, but either they have to be in the law as passed by you, or they can be in COMAR.
Okay, so the governor, he or she can declare a state of emergency, right?
Mhm.
And following that state of emergency, the things that are in this bill would be covered.
If the state employee was a member, not the last two aren't related to a state of emergency. They're just adding the uniform services to folks who can take leave for training purposes or who are deployed, because of whatever the United States has gotten itself into.
More succinctly, because everybody's tired, the bill is necessary.
The bill is necessary if you think that state employees can be on the disaster leave part.
Yeah.
If you think that, state employees who are members of these organizations be entitled to disaster service leave, then it would be necessary. Otherwise, these employees, state employees who are members of these organizations to help with disasters would not be able to use disaster service leave, paid disaster service leave.
Okay.
Senator Lynn, you got a motion?
Motion and a second on the favorable. I guess we'll do that on- Have a motion and a second on a favorable with amendments. All those in favor, raise your hand. Seeing no opposition, that bill receives favorable with amendments, unanimous report. Oh, yeah. That's how we roll in finance. All right. Next bill, Senate Bill 170, David.
Okay, Senate Bill 170. I have a reprint in front of you because there was an amendment offered by the sponsor. that makes the bill prospective. That's on the very last page of the reprint. So it wouldn't apply to any existing contracts. Simply what Senate Bill 170 does is requires either that the state prevailing wage be paid on identified covered projects with 2 megawatts of generation potential. And I assume I don't know very much about that end of it. I'm assuming it's enough to power a couple light bulbs. But these particular projects, which are as a sponsor testified, are solar projects, that it would require that on these projects, if they've have a certificate from the PSC, they would have to pay prevailing wages, or they must have a PLA, project labor agreement in place. A project labor agreement, for those of you who don't know, is essentially a collective bargaining agreement for that particular project. So the PLA covers working conditions, all matters that must occur between the employees, the contractors, the subcontractors, and the developer as they proceed with the project.
The amendment on it is okay if we take time to evaluate that and hold this bill, please.
Well, I'm told everybody gets one hold.
Thank you. Not everybody, every bill gets one hold. Yeah, what? Not everybody, every bill.
Do we know if there's any MBWB requirements on this?
On this, in this particular bill,
Right, not in a bill, but on that sector in general, because I
Well,
know
the-
it doesn't specify in this exact bill, but on this industry.
that I don't know, but again, there's no state monies here.
Mhm.
So if you couldn't, make that, you could suggest that they hire minority contractors, but you really can't do anything because there's no state
But we
dollars.
can impose a project labor agreement.
No, you can't impose a project labor agreement. It says that they either pay prevailing wages unless they have a PLA.
Oh,
So, and if there are stipulations for the PLA that, and I'll read them real quickly. The PLA must bind all contractors and subcontractors on the covered project through the inclusion of specifications and all relevant solicitation provisions. Allow all contractors and subcontractors to compete for contracts and subcontracts on the project without regard to whether they otherwise parties to collective bargaining. You can mandate that you're mandating that they pay the prevailing wage. But if they have a PLA, they would get out of that prevailing wage mandate if they have a PLA and the PLA meets these 6 factors.
Okay, so that bill will be held until the next voting session.
Okay.
All right, next bill for your consideration, Senate Bill 172.
Oh, yeah, so I'm looking at last year's fiscal floor report for 172. Senate Bill 172 requires the the Commissioner of Labor and Industry to disseminate certain information on minors with work permits to various organizations, but these organizations have to be listed with the commissioner, so the commissioner has to make sure they're okay to divulge this information to. It's the home address and phone number of these minors. The parent has to consent for this information to be disseminated, otherwise it can't happen. So that's essentially what this bill does.
You can. Does somebody want a second? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, sorry. I'm fine with the bill. I think in general with the notification, I feel like we did this last year, the notification.
It was
How did the
vetoed.
parent,
Oh.
well, it must be a bad, no, just kidding.
Right.
How did the parents know that they need to? Is it like a checkbox or something?
I
I'm
would-
trying to remember.
I think there's got to be regulations in if the Commissioner of Labor and Industry would have to contact the parent. They can't just opt out, and let them know if they want to opt out of this. So the commissioner would be required to contact the parent to let them know, do you want your child's information to be given to these folks?
But the reason we're doing this is because the child has signed up to get information. But they've signed up for an opportunity, but they can't be communicated with right now. That's the problem.
Yes.
Correct. Okay, all right. No, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for a favorable report on Senate Bill 172. Are there any questions? All those in favor, raise your hand. Seeing no opposition, that bill receives a unanimous report. Senate Bill 198.
Okay, Senate Bill 198, you have a reprint in front of you. The chair has offered an amendment to this bill. If you recall, this bill requires home installed elevators to go through a final inspection approval by the Maryland Department of Labor. These elevators would be exempt from all subsequent periodic inspections. They would only have to be subject to a final inspection. The chair is offering an amendment. A question came up during the hearing about the privacy of these homes. And I called the department and they explained that they would have to register with the department. And as part of that registration, their information would be with the department. So if somebody wanted to, they would approach the department, ask for a list of all elevators. This information would be available unless you, as the General Assembly said, it couldn't be available. So the amendment on page 2 of the reprint would say that the commissioner may not disclose to the public a registered elevator unit installed in a privately owned single-family residential dwelling and shall delete the registration of the elevator unit that is installed in a privately owned single-family residential dwelling upon completion of the final acceptance inspection that is required by this bill.
Okay, motion and second? Second. Motion and a second on the amendment. Any questions? Okay. It is a sponsor amendment. No, actually, yeah,
It's
it was actually my amendment.
the
but
chair's amendment.
It was my amendment, yeah. Sure. All right, so the amendment is before you. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, the bill as amended is before you. Is there a motion?
Second.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable as amended. Any questions? All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Okay, I got 1, 2, and 3. All right, that bill receives a favorable report with 3 in opposition. That is the last bill on our voting list for today. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned. Up.
Got one last minute withdrawal. Senator Louis Young is withdrawing alcohol bill, Senate Bill 687.
Oh.
Can we-
All those in favor of the unfavorable on a withdrawn bill, say aye. Any opposition? That bill will be reported unfavorable, withdrawn. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Long day. Thank. Are we?